Section 10, parts 55 through 59 of The Painted Veil by Somerset Maugham. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Part 55. But a day or two later, Kitty made an unforeseen discovery. She went to the convent as usual and set about her first work of seeing that the children were washed and dressed. Since the nuns held firmly that the night air was harmful, the atmosphere in the dormitory was close and fetid. After the freshness of the morning, it always made Kitty a little uncomfortable, and she hastened to open such windows as would. But today she felt on a sudden desperately sick, and with her head swimming she stood at the window trying to compose herself. It had never been as bad as this before. Then nausea overwhelmed her, and she vomited. She gave a cry so that the children were frightened, and the older girl who was helping her ran up, and, seeing Kitty white and trembling, stopped short with an exclamation, "Cholera!" The thought flashed through Kitty's mind, and then a death-like feeling came over her. She was seized with terror. She struggled for a moment against the night that seemed agonizingly to run through her veins. She felt horribly ill. And then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she did not know at first where she was. She seemed to be lying on the floor, and, moving her head slightly, she thought that there was a pillow under it. She could not remember. The Mother Superior was kneeling by her side, holding smelling salts to her nose, and Sister St. Joseph was looking at her. Then it came back. Cholera! She saw the consternation on the nuns' faces. Sister St. Joseph looked huge, and her outline was blurred. Once more terror overwhelmed her. "Oh, Mother, Mother," she sobbed. "Am I going to die? I don't want to die." "Of course you're not going to die," said the Mother Superior. She was quite composed, and there was even amusement in her eyes. "But it's cholera. Where's Walter? Has he been sent for? Oh, Mother, Mother!" She burst into a flood of tears. The Mother Superior gave her hand, and Kitty seized it as though it were a hold upon the life she feared to lose. "Come, come, my dear child, you mustn't be so silly. It's not cholera or anything of the kind." "Where's Walter?" "Your husband is much too busy to be troubled. In 5 minutes you'll be perfectly well." Kitty looked at her with staring, harassed eyes. Why did she take it so calmly? It was cruel. "Keep perfectly quiet for a minute," said the Mother Superior. "There is nothing to alarm yourself about." Kitty felt her heart beat madly. She had grown so used to the thought of cholera that it had ceased to seem possible that she could catch it. Oh, the fool she had been! She knew she was going to die. She was frightened. The girls brought in a long rattan chair and placed it by the window. "Come, let us lift you," said the Mother Superior. "You will be more comfortable on the chaise lounge. Do you think you can stand?" She put her hands under Kitty's arms, and Sister St. Joseph helped her to her feet. She sank exhausted into the chair. "I'd better shut the window," said Sister St. Joseph. "The early morning air cannot be good for her." "No, no," said Kitty. "Please leave it open." It gave her confidence to see the blue sky. She was shaken, but certainly she began to feel better. The two nuns looked at her for a moment in silence, and Sister St. Joseph said something to the Mother Superior which she could not understand. Then the Mother Superior sat on the side of the chair and took her hand. "Listen, ma chérie enfant." She asked her 1 or 2 questions. Kitty answered them without knowing what they meant. Her lips were trembling so that she could hardly frame the words. "There's no doubt about it," said Sister St. Joseph. I'm not one to be deceived in such a matter." She gave a little laugh in which Kitty seemed to discern a certain excitement and not a little affection. The Mother Superior, still holding Kitty's hand, smiled with soft tenderness. "Sister St. Joseph has more experience of these things than I have, dear child, and she said at once what was the matter with you. She was evidently quite right." "What do you mean?" asked Kitty anxiously. "It is quite evident. Did the possibility of such a thing never occur to you? You are with child, my dear." The start that Kitty gave shook her from head to foot, and she put her feet to the ground as though to spring up. Lie still," said the Mother Superior. Kitty felt herself blush furiously, and she put her hands to her breasts. "It is impossible. It isn't true." "Que si que dit?" asked Sister St. Joseph. The Mother Superior translated. Sister St. Joseph's broad, simple face with its red cheeks was beaming. "No mistake is possible. I give you my word of honor." "How long have you been married, my child?" asked the Mother Superior. "Why, when my sister-in-law had been married as long as you, she had already 2 babies." Kitty sank back into the chair. There was death in her heart. "I'm so ashamed," she whispered. "Because you're going to have a baby? Why, what can be more natural?" "Quelle joie pour le docteur," said Sister St. Joseph. "Yes, think what is happiness for your husband. He will be overwhelmed with joy. You have only to see him with babies, and the look on his face when he plays with them, to see how enchanted he will be to have one of his own." For a little while Kitty was silent. The 2 nuns looked at her with tender interest, and the Mother Superior stroked her hand. "It was silly of me not to have suspected it before," said Kitty. "At all events, I'm glad it's not cholera. I feel very much better. I will get back to my work." "Not to-day, my dear child. You have had a shock. You had much better go home and rest yourself." No, I would much rather stay and work." "I insist. What would our good doctor say if I let you be imprudent? Come tomorrow if you like, or the day after, but today you must be quiet. I will send for a chair. Would you like me to let one of our young girls go with you?" No, I shall be all right alone." Part 56. Kitty was lying on her bed, and the shutters were closed. It was after luncheon, and the servants slept. What she had learnt that morning, and now she was certain that it was true, filled her with consternation. Ever since she came home she had been trying to think, but her mind was a blank, and she could not collect her thoughts. Suddenly she heard a step. The feet were booted so that it could not be one of the boys. With a gasp of apprehension she realized that it could only be her husband. He was in the sitting room, and she heard herself called. She did not reply. There was a moment's silence, and then a knock on her door. "Yes." "May I come in?" Kitty rose from her bed and slipped into a dressing gown. "Yes." He entered. She was glad that the closed shutters shadowed her face. "I hope I didn't wake you." "I knocked very, very gently. I haven't been asleep." He went to one of the windows and threw open the shutter. A flow of warm light streamed into the room. "What is it?" she asked. "Why are you back so early?" "The sisters said that you weren't very well. I thought I'd better come and see what was the matter." A flash of anger passed through her. "What would you have said if it had been cholera?" "If it had been, you certainly couldn't have made your way home this morning." She went to the dressing-table and passed the comb through her shingled hair. She wanted to gain time. Then, sitting down, she lit a cigarette. I wasn't very well this morning, and the Mother Superior thought I'd better come back here. But I'm perfectly all right again. I shall go to the convent as usual tomorrow." "What was the matter with you?" "Didn't they tell you?" "No, the Mother Superior said that you must tell me yourself." He did now what he did seldom. He looked her full in the face. His professional instincts were stronger than his personal. She hesitated. Then she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm going to have a baby," she said. She was accustomed to his habit of meeting with silence, a statement which you would naturally expect to evoke an exclamation, but never had it seemed to her more devastating. He said nothing. He made no gesture. No movement on his face nor change of expression in his dark eyes indicated that he had heard. She felt suddenly inclined to cry. If a man loved his wife and his wife loved him, at such a moment they were drawn together by a poignant emotion. The silence was intolerable, and she broke it. "I don't know why it never occurred to me before. It was stupid of me, but what with one thing and another—" "How long when do you expect to be confined?" The words seemed to issue from his lips with difficulty. She felt that his throat was as dry as hers. It was a nuisance that her lips trembled so when she spoke. If he was not of stone, it must excite his pity. "I suppose I've been like this between 2 and 3 months." "Am I the father?" She gave a little gasp. There was just a shadow of a tremor in his voice. It was dreadful, that cold self-control of his which made the smallest token of emotion so shattering. She did not know why she thought suddenly of an instrument she had been shown in Hong Kong upon which a needle oscillated a little, and she had been told that this represented an earthquake 1,000 miles away in which perhaps 1,000 persons had lost their lives. She looked at him. He was ghastly pale. She had seen that pallor on him once, twice before. He was looking down, a little sideways. "Well?" She clasped her hands. She knew that if she could say yes, it would mean everything in the world to him. He would believe her, of course he would believe her, because he wanted to, and then he would forgive. She knew how deep was his tenderness and how ready he was, for all his shyness, to expend it. She knew that he was not vindictive. He would forgive her if she could but give him an excuse an excuse that touched his heart, and he would forgive completely. She could count on him never to throw the past in her teeth. Cruel he might be, cold and morbid, but he was neither mean nor petty. It would alter everything if she said yes. And she had an urgent need for sympathy. The unexpected knowledge that she was with child had overwhelmed her with strange hopes and unforeseen desires. She felt weak, frightened a little, alone, and very far from any friends. That morning, though she cared little for her mother, she had had a sudden craving to be with her. She needed help and consolation. She did not love Walter. She knew that she never could. But at this moment she longed with all her heart for him to take her in his arms so that she could lay her head on his breast. Clinging to him, she could have cried happily. She wanted him to kiss her, and she wanted to twine her arms around his neck. She began to weep. She had lied so much, and she could lie so easily. What could a lie matter when it could only do good? A lie, a lie. What was a lie? It was so easy to say yes. She saw Walter's eyes melt and his arms outstretched towards her. She couldn't say it. She didn't know why. She just couldn't. All she had gone through during these bitter weeks, Charlie and his unkindness, The cholera and all these people dying, the nuns, oddly enough, even that funny, drunken little Waddington. It all seemed to have changed her so that she did not know herself. Though she was so deeply moved, some bystander in her soul seemed to watch her with terror and surprise. She had to tell the truth. It did not seem worthwhile to lie. Her thoughts wandered strangely. On a sudden she saw that dead beggar at the foot of the compound wall. Why should she think of him? She did not sob. The tears streamed down her face quite easily, with wide eyes. At last she answered the question. He had asked her if he was the child's father. "I don't know," she said. He gave the ghost of a chuckle. It made Kitty shudder. "It's a bit awkward, isn't it?" His answer was characteristic. It was exactly what she would have expected him to say, but it made her heart sink. She wondered if he realized how hard it had been for her to tell the truth. At the same moment she realized that it had not been in the least hard, but inevitable, and if he gave her credit for it. Her answer, "I don't know, hammered away in her head. It was impossible now to take it back. She got her handkerchief from her bag and dried her eyes. They did not speak. There was a siphon on the table by her bed, and he got her a glass of water. He brought it to her and held the glass while she drank. She noticed how thin his hand was. It was a fine hand, slender, with long fingers, but now it was nothing but skin and bone. It trembled a little. He could control his face, but his hand betrayed him. "Don't mind my crying," she said. "It's nothing, really. It's only that I can't help the water running out of my eyes." She drank the water and put the glass back. He sat down on a chair and lit a cigarette. He gave a little sigh. Once or twice before she had heard him sigh like that, and it always gave her a catch at the heart. Looking at him now, for he was staring with abstracted gaze out of the window, she was surprised that she had not noticed before how terribly thin he had grown during the last weeks. His temples were sunken, and the bones of his face showed through the skin. His clothes hung on him loosely as though they had been made for a larger man. Through his sunburn, his face had a greenish pallor. He looked exhausted. He was working too hard, sleeping little, and eating nothing. In her own grief and perturbation, she found room to pity him. It was cruel to think that she could do nothing for him. He put his hand over his forehead as though his head were aching, and she had a feeling that in his brain, too, those words hammered madly. "I don't know, I don't know." It was strange that this moody, cold, and shy man should have such a natural affection for very little babies. Most men didn't care much even for their own, but the nuns, touched and a little amused, had more than once spoken of it. If he felt like that about those funny little Chinese babies, what would he have felt about his own? Kitty bit her lips in order to prevent herself from crying again. He looked at his watch. "I'm afraid I must go back to the city. I have a great deal to do today. Shall you be all right?" "Oh, yes, don't bother about me." "I think you'd better not wait for me this evening. I may be very late, and I'll get something to eat from Colonel Yu." "Very well." He rose. "If I were you, I wouldn't try to do anything today. You had better take it easy. Is there anything you want before I go?" "No, thanks. I shall be quite all right." He paused for an instant as though he were undecided, and then, abruptly and without looking at her, took his hat and walked out of the room. She heard him go through the compound. She felt terribly alone. There was no need for self-restraint now, and she gave herself up to a passion of tears. Part 57. The night was sultry, and Kitty sat at the window looking at the fantastic roofs, dark against the starlight of the Chinese temple, when at last Walter came in. Her eyes were heavy with weeping, but she was composed. Notwithstanding all there was to harass her, she felt, perhaps only from exhaustion, strangely at peace. "I thought you'd be already in bed," said Walter as he came in. "I wasn't sleepy. I thought it cooler to sit up. Have you had any dinner?" "All I want." He walked up and down the long room, and she saw that he had something to say to her. She knew that he was embarrassed. Without concern, she waited for him to summon up his resolution. He began abruptly. "I've been thinking about what you told me this afternoon. It seems to me that it would be better if you went away. I've spoken to Colonel Yu, and he will give you an escort. You could take the Amma with you. You will be quite safe." "Where is there for me to go?" "You can go to your mother's." "Do you think she would be pleased to see me?" He paused for a moment, hesitating, as though for reflection. "Then you can go to Hong Kong." "What should I do there?" "You will need a good deal of care and attention. I don't think it's fair to ask you to stay here." She could not prevent the smile, not only of bitterness, but of frank amusement that crossed her face. She gave him a glance and very nearly laughed. "I don't know why you should be so anxious about my health." He came over to the window and stood looking out at the night. There had never been so many stars in the unclouded sky. "This isn't the place for a woman in your condition." She looked at him, white in his thin clothes against the darkness. There was something sinister in his fine profile, and yet oddly enough at this moment it excited in her no fear. "When you insisted on my coming here, did you want it to kill me?" she asked suddenly. He was so long answering that she thought he had refused to hear. "At first." She gave a little shudder, for it was the first time he had admitted his intention. But she bore him no ill will for it. Her feeling surprised herself. There was a certain admiration in it, and a faint amusement. She did not quite know why, but suddenly thinking of Charlie Townsend, he seemed to her an abject fool. "It was a terrible risk you were taking," she answered. "With your sensitive conscience, I wonder if you could ever have forgiven yourself if I had died." "Well, you haven't. You've thrived on it." "I've never felt better in my life." She had an instinct to throw herself on the mercy of his humor. After all they had gone through, when they were living amid those scenes of horror and desolation, it seemed inept to attach importance to the ridiculous act of fornication. When death stood round the corner, taking lives like a gardener digging up potatoes, it was foolishness to care what dirty things this person or that did with his body. If she could only have realized how little Charlie meant to her, so that now already she had difficulty in calling up his features to her imagination, and how entirely the love of him had passed out of her heart. Because she had no feeling for Townsend, the various acts she had committed with him had lost their significance. She had regained her heart, and what she had given of her body seemed not to matter a rap. She was inclined to say to Walter, "Look here, don't you think we've been silly long enough? We've sulked with one another like children. Why can't we kiss and be friends? There's no reason why we shouldn't be friends just because we're not lovers." He stood very still, and the lamplight made the pallor of his impressive face startling. She did not trust him. If she said the wrong thing, he would turn upon her with such an icy sternness. She knew by now his extreme sensitiveness, for which his acid irony was a protection, and how quickly he could close his heart if his feelings were hurt. She had a moment's irritation at his stupidity. Surely what troubled him most was the wound of his vanity. She vaguely realized that this is the hardest of all wounds to heal. It was singular that men attached so much importance to their wives' faithfulness. When first she had gone with Charlie, she had expected to feel quite different, a changed woman. But she had seemed to herself exactly the same. She had experienced only well-being and a greater vitality. She wished now that she had been able to tell Walter that the child was his. The lie would have meant so little to her, and the assurance would have been so great a comfort to him. And after all, it might not be a lie. It was funny that something in her heart which had prevented her from giving herself the benefit of the doubt. How silly men were! Their part in procreation was so unimportant. It was the woman who carried the child through long months of uneasiness and bore it with pain, and yet a man, because of his momentary connection, made such preposterous claims. Why should that make any difference to him in his feelings towards the child? Then Kitty's thoughts wandered to the child which she herself would bear. She thought of it not with emotion, nor with a passion of maternity, but with an idle curiosity. "I dare say you'd like to think it over a little," said Walter, breaking the long silence. "Think what?" He turned a little as if he were surprised. "About when you want to go." "But I don't want to go." "Why not?" "I like my work at the convent. I think I'm making myself useful. I should prefer to stay as long as you do." "I think I should tell you that in your present condition you're probably more liable to catch any infection that happens to be about." "I like the discreet way you put it," she smiled ironically. "You're not staying for my sake?" She hesitated. He little knew that now the strongest emotion he excited in her, and the most unexpected, was pity. "No, you don't love me. I often think I rather bore you." "I shouldn't have thought you were the sort of person to put yourself out for a few stuffy nuns and a parcel of Chinese brats." Her lips outlined a smile. "I think it's rather unfair to despise me so much because you made such a mistake in your judgment of me. It's not my fault that you were such an ass." "If you're determined to stay, you are of course at liberty to do so." "I'm sorry I can't give you the opportunity of being magnanimous." She found it strangely hard to be quite serious with him. "As a matter of fact, you're quite right. It's not only for the orphans that I'm staying. You see, I'm in the peculiar position that I haven't got a soul in the world that I can go to. I know no one who wouldn't think me a nuisance. I know no one who cares a row of pins if I'm dead or alive." He frowned, but he did not frown in anger. "We have made a dreadful hash of things, haven't we?" he said. "Do you still want to divorce me? I don't think I care any more." "You must know that by bringing you here, I've condoned the offense." "I didn't know. You see, I haven't made a study of infidelity. What are we going to do, then, when we leave here? Are we going to live together?" "Oh, don't you think we can let the future take care of itself?" There was a weariness of death in his voice. Part 58. 2 or 3 days later, Waddington fetched Kitty from the convent, for her restlessness had induced her immediately to resume her work, and took her to drink the promised cup of tea with his mistress. Kitty had on more than one occasion dined at Waddington's house. It was a square, white, and pretentious building, such as the customs build for their officials all over China, and the dining room in which they ate, the dining room in which they sat, were furnished with prim and solid furniture. They had the appearance of being partly offices and partly hotel. There was nothing homelike in them, and you understood that these houses were merely places of haphazard sojourn to their successive occupants. It would never have occurred to you that on an upper floor mystery and perhaps romance dwelt shrouded. They ascended the flight of stairs, and Waddington opened a door. Kitty went into a large bare room with whitewashed walls on which hung scrolls in various calligraphies. At a square table, on a stiff armchair, both of black wood and heavily carved, sat the Manchu. She rose as Kitty and Waddington entered, but made no step forward. "Here she is," said Waddington, and added something in Chinese. Kitty shook hands with her. She was slim in her long embroidered gown, and somewhat taller than Kitty, used to the Southern people, had expected. She wore a jacket of pale green silk, with tight sleeves that came over her wrists, and on her black hair, elaborately dressed, was the headdress of the Manchu woman. Her face was covered with powder, and her cheeks from the eyes to the mouth heavily rouged. Her plucked eyebrows were a thin, dark line, and her mouth was scarlet. From this mask her black, slightly slanting large eyes burned the lakes of liquid jet. She seemed more like an idol than a woman. Her movements were slow and assured. Kitty had the impression that she was slightly shy but very curious. She nodded her head 2 or 3 times, looking at Kitty, while Waddington spoke of her. Kitty noticed her hands. They were preternaturally long, very slender, of the color of ivory, and the exquisite nails were painted. Kitty thought she had never seen anything so lovely as those languid and elegant hands. They suggested the breeding of uncounted centuries. She spoke a little, in a high voice like the twittering of birds in an orchard, and Waddington, translating, told Kitty that she was glad to see her. How old was she, and how many children had she got? They sat down on 3 straight chairs at the square table, and a boy brought in bowls of tea, pale and scented with jasmine. The Manchu lady handed Kitty a green tin of 3 Castle cigarettes. Beside the table and the chairs the room contained little furniture. There was a wide pallet bed on which was an embroidered headrest and 2 sandalwood chests. "What does she do with herself all day long?" asked Kitty. "She paints a little, and sometimes she writes a poem, but she mostly sits. She smokes, but only in moderation, which is fortunate, since one of my duties is to prevent the traffic in opium." "Do you smoke?" asked Kitty. "Seldom. To tell you the truth, I much prefer whiskey." There was in the room a faintly acrid smell. It was not unpleasant, but peculiar and exotic. "Tell her that I'm sorry I cannot talk to her. I'm sure we have many things to say to one another." When this was translated to the Manchu, she gave Kitty a quick glance in which there was the hint of a smile. She was impressive as she sat without embarrassment in her beautiful clothes, and from the painted face the eyes looked out weary, self-possessed, and unfathomable. She was unreal, like a picture, and yet had an elegance which made Kitty feel all thumbs. Kitty had never paid anything but passing and somewhat contemptuous attention to the china in which fate had thrown her. It was not done in her set. Now she seemed on a sudden to have an inkling of something remote and mysterious. Here was the East, immemorable, dark, and inscrutable. The beliefs and the ideals of the West seemed crude beside ideals and beliefs of which in this exquisite creature she seemed to catch a fugitive glimpse. Here was a different life, lived on a different plane. Kitty felt strangely that the sight of this idol with her painted face and slanting, weary eyes made the efforts and the pains of the everyday world she knew slightly absurd. That colored mask seemed to hide the secret of an abundant, profound, and significant experience. Those long, delicate hands with their tapering fingers held the key of riddles undivined. "What does she think about all day long?" asked Kitty. "Nothing," smiled Waddington. "She's wonderful. Tell her I've never seen such beautiful hands. I wonder what she sees in you." Waddington, smiling, translated the question. "She says I'm good." "As if a woman ever loved a man for his virtue," Kitty mocked. The Manchu laughed but once. This was when Kitty, for something to say, expressed admiration of a jade bracelet she wore. She took it off, and Kitty, trying to put it on, found, though her hands were small enough, that it would not pass over her knuckles. Then the Manchu burst into childlike laughter. She said something to Waddington and called for an ama. She gave her an instruction, and the ama in a moment brought in a pair of very beautiful Manchu shoes. "She wants to give you these if you can wear them," said Waddington. "You'll find they make quite good bedroom slippers." "They fit me perfectly," said Kitty, not without satisfaction. But she noticed a roguish smile on Waddington's face. "Are they too big for her?" she asked quickly. "Miles." Kitty laughed, and when Waddington translated, the Manchu and the ama laughed also. When Kitty and Waddington a little later were walking up the hill together, she turned to him with a friendly smile. "You did not tell me that you had a great affection for her." "What makes you think I have?" "I saw it in your eyes. It's strange. It must be like loving a phantom or a dream. Men are incalculable. I thought you were like everybody else, and now I feel that I don't know the first thing about you." As they reached the bungalow, he asked her abruptly, "Why did you want to see her?" Kitty hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm looking for something, and I don't quite know what it is. But I know that it is very important for me to know it, and if I did, it would make all the difference. Perhaps the nuns know it. When I'm with them, I feel they hold a secret which they will not share with me. I don't know why it came into my head that if I saw this Manchu woman, I should have an inkling of what I am looking for. Perhaps she could tell me, if she could." "What makes you think she knows it?" Kitty gave him a sidelong glance, but did not answer. Instead, she asked him a question. "Do you know it?" He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. "Tao. Some of us look for the way in opium, and some in God. Some of us in whiskey, and some in love. It is all the same way, and it leads nowhither." End of section 10.